to Alex and Sandra, our musicians today. Thank you for bringing the music. A reading called The Turning by Tom Hornstra. Yes, it was right on that spot. I remember the day when the traveling carnival came, how I tried my shaky hand at a game. I wanted a pink stuffed snake I saw hanging, and the barker egged me on. Keep trying, one more time, just one more time. Putting down quarters, shooting and missing, I finally got a cheap plastic trinket. Thus, feeling cheated out of my treasure, seeking for something more real and sure, I went to get a hot Polish sausage. At least a sausage is still a sausage. You know what you're getting, but when I bit into it, it turned out to be a breaded hot dog. I walked away in complete disillusion, ignoring the crowds, the screams of children, the Ferris wheel and the carousel spinning, the festive sights and smells all around me, for what had once been a gay celebration when I was younger had lost its luster, was now nothing more than a sleazy concoction of loud, grinding engines and hot, grimy metal, blinking lights and rank herds of people. But as I was walking home by the lake shore, head hung low, I noticed a flower blooming alone. In innocent beauty, humble perfection, it was so precious, and it cost me nothing but attention. Something within me just seemed to shatter. Pain and beauty came flooding together, and I saw the living world in its splendor as for the first time I've ever seen it. And I started to pay the closest attention to every detail, color, and texture of all the living things around me. It seemed as if they were all wanted to greet me, and for me to take and root them more deeply within each moment's living remembrance. And though I didn't quite understand it, I welcomed them into my heart. I accepted, and that single act was the beginning of everything. The message today is called Transformation of Transubstantiation. Oh my goodness. I wrote the title. Transformation of Transubstantiation. Why everything is holy now. Oh my goodness. So this there. Now, I'm so glad you're here, Bucky, not only to get that word right, but I've been thinking a lot about the message that you shared called Being Found in the Dark, where you stated that belief is something we find, while faith is something that finds us. That message made me think of how all those experiences where faith has been forged in the mysteries, in the dark night of the soul, or in those moments when we must find that gentle surrender to that terrible truth that we do not have control over everything that happens in our lives. Religion equips us for being found in those times. Now, as we face what we do or do not have assurance in, our beliefs may grow and change over time. And this, in many ways, is the gift of transformation. To take the profane, the everyday, mundane, and ordinary and make it extraordinary, sacred, blessed, well, isn't that kind of the ultimate transformation? So I would like to sanctify this day. I declare this a holy day. I consecrate this day. Do I have the power to do that? Do you? I heard a yes. Amen. One of the cornerstones of my own faith is this understanding that transformation is always possible. And this is critical for me because often when I turn on the news, I find a world that's more full of despair than hope. And yet, as Tom's story shares, it is a world that is constantly being transformed. Perhaps you could even say consecrated by beauty, that amidst the suffering and despair right alongside of it is the beauty that comes along with these days that we have. So I wanted to use the example of the Eucharist as a way of exploring how the ordinary becomes extraordinary, or how the profane becomes sacred. Now, I use this example not to emphasize the normativity of Christianity, which shows up often in this free country, but because I think it's critical as Unitarian Universalists to be fluent in religious languages and rituals, especially of the dominant culture, which in this world and in this region is absolutely Christianity. So the Eucharist, or communion, has its roots in a historical event, or at least in a story that many hold to be a historical event. This day is called the Last Supper in the story, and it is celebrated on Maundy Thursday, which is the Thursday before Easter, which comes at the end of March this year. And I've been thinking a little bit about this Holy Week that is in the Christian tradition, which is that last week of March this year. So the story goes that during the celebration of Passover, sometime around the year 30 of the Common Era, a Jewish man was gathering with his friends. His name was Jesus of Nazareth, and he had a ministry of teaching and healing. He had gained a following, including a group of close associates, which are called disciples, or what historians today might call members of the Jesus movement. The story from the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 26, verses 26 through 29, tell the story like this. While they were eating, Jesus took a loaf of bread, and after blessing it, he broke it, gave it to the disciples, and said, "Take, eat, this is my body." Then he took a cup, and after giving thanks, he gave it to them, saying, "Drink from it, all of you, for this is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins. I tell you, I will never drink of this fruit of the vine until the day when I drink it new with you in my Father's kingdom." This is known as the Last Supper because just a few days later, which is part of the Easter story, Jesus was sentenced to death by the current day public capital punishment system, which in those days was to be nailed on a cross and hung until essentially your shoulders gave away and your neck broke. It was a horrendous way of perhaps any capital punishment is, but so that it was called the Last Supper. Now, the Gospel of Matthew, what I just read from, is in what is called the New Testament. The word testament is another word for covenant. A covenant is a mutual commitment, not just a promise made to someone, but a promise made between. So it's, in the case of the covenant, it is God's promise to humanity, but also humanity's promise to God. It's a two-way promise. That's what makes it a covenant. And the Old Testament is the first book of the Christian sacred scripture, and so the Old Covenant. And then the second part of the book, the post-Jesus story, is called the New Testament, or the New Covenant. And the Eucharist really encapsulates, I think, this new covenant and the promise of what people understand to be the promise between humans and God in this tradition, which is this forgiveness of sins, this everlasting life, this unity together. And I will say that beliefs amongst this definitely do vary. The oldest communion texts show 3 cups, the 3 sacraments. Now, one of these is the cup of water for baptism. The sacrament of baptism, water is used as a symbol of transformation throughout biblical stories. And being immersed in water, baptized, is a sacrament, a holy ritual of transformation. The way I would describe it is where one moves from the individual or self-interest, the material interest, towards unity with the all, openness or transformation to being more of the spiritual self than the material self, one with the divine, you could say. Then there is the cup of wine, and this is the ritual of the Eucharist, or communion. Now, in the Catholic tradition, which traces its lineage all the way back to those original disciples around the table in what's called the apostolic succession of bishops, meaning that that disciple blessed the next disciple, which blessed the next disciple, and you can trace it all the way back to that lineage. Only the people that have been in that apostolic succession of bishops may take the ordinary elements of bread and wine, or wafers and grape juice, depending, and consecrate it every single Sunday. And through this term that I'm having such a hard time saying, transubstantiation, meaning that the bread and wine look like the regular everyday elements. They still look like the wine and the bread, but they've actually changed substance. This is a Catholic understanding. They only appear to be bread and wine. They are actually the body and blood of that universal Christ. And for those who have gone through the ritual of public profession or confirmation and prepared themselves to receive this, each Sunday they process and are given this sacrament. And sacrament being spiritual power being transmitted. And while, again, beliefs vary, it's part of experiencing that promise, often understood as the promise of everlasting life, of having whatever, sins or debts that you have in this life, that they are forgiven, and that those who have done, have sins or debts for you, if they have not gone through something like this, well, then they will be judged and possibly eternally banished to a fiery hell. So in communion, you are one with this covenant. You are one with this peace. And this is part of the ritual. And it's interesting, there's some theologians will place an emphasis on the broken bread, that literally a part of all of this symbolizes that, kind of like the Leonard Cohen song, there's a crack in everything, and that's where the light comes in, that our lives literally have to be broken in order to receive this kind of love. And there's several different sayings and stories that talk about that love can only be written on top of the heart until the heart breaks, and then the message of love can actually get in. So as you can imagine, within the Catholic tradition, if you did not have a Catholic priest, nobody could sanctify and consecrate this bread and wine and give communion. And so this was a problem in more rural areas or where there weren't priests, and people were pretty anxious when they couldn't get communion. And also during the 1500s, there was that going on. There was also something called the Renaissance humanism, which was really bringing back a lot of virtuous living and the promotion of the elegance of the spoken word. And there was these reformers who wanted to see the church change. One of these was Martin Luther, where Lutherans, the tradition of Lutheranism comes from. And essentially they began to say, this isn't the right teaching. This isn't exactly what happens with the Eucharist in particular. So Luther understood it as consubstantiation. So the blood was present in, with, and under the elements of the bread and wine, but the priest didn't actually consecrate them. So other people could be the ones to deliver communion. You didn't need that apostolic succession of bishops. Ulrich Zwingli, who was from Switzerland, he had a whole different view. He believed that this whole ritual was a memorial, that it's just bread, it's just wine. But when we eat it with reverence, when we take the ritual with care, we are revisiting that promise, that covenant as a memorial, and these are the symbols of that, and that we can really experience it even with it just being a memorial. John Calvin, who was kind of the father of a lot of the Reformed traditions, he had a middle way. He said, well, okay, so we believe that Jesus was a human being who died, so he is in heaven, and matter cannot be both in heaven and on earth, so we can't change this, we can't have Jesus here, but the Holy Spirit can be here. So these elements include that spiritual presence, and that's what the Eucharist has. So even amongst these reformers, they couldn't agree. And as Christianity began to be reformed, instead of maybe just a zig or a zag or another way of being Catholic, it actually began, I think of it as kind of like when you shatter glass, and it goes in all these different directions, a web of different identities, different ideas about authority, different ideas about the holy and the sacred, and those are today what are called the Christian denominations. And I just looked it up, and according to several different documents, there's about 33,000 different Christian denominations. And again, a big part of this is all about what is the sacred? Who can make it sacred? And how do we interface with it? So, and those range from, the 1 billion-member Catholic Church to the 100-member house church that is out there. So, and all of them have different ways of understanding. The laity, in some cases, serve the communion. The community votes on who can serve the communion in some, like the United Church of Christ. Others have a bishop or some kind of authority that says this person can or cannot do the sacraments. So again, it depends. But still, you can see how that sort of the spiritual idea of what is transformed, what is the sacred, has kind of leaked out of church authority and perhaps even into the yeast, flour, and water, and into the grapes and honey. Unitarians and Universalists were Christian denominations having these same kinds of conversations. In the 1960s, these two Christian denominations essentially came together to form a new world religion, honoring their roots from that Christian and Jewish teachings, but saying that they are not bound in particular by any one religion, and especially that there is no authority over them, that each individual can experience the sacred and the holy in their own way, that we can each know through revelatory or awe and wonder, spiritual and religious experiences, a little bit about that. And others, I'm not going to say what Unitarian Universalists believe, because that is, that's not my job. It is diverse, and the ways in which that's interpreted is like that field of wildflowers, all different kinds, but beautiful in that diversity. So I am wondering, at this point, Miriam, would you want to go up and tell the kids to come down? Okay, thank you. So I've mentioned that there were these 3 cups, the cup of water and the cup of wine, and that is really what was a big part, at least in the Christian tradition, of what it meant to embrace and literally become closer to the sacred, to experience the sacred and the holy. But there was a 3rd cup. If you look at the most ancient texts, the 3rd cup was actually in the middle. There was the water and the wine, and in the middle was the 3rd cup. And this was uncovered by scholars that were looking for, especially for symbols around the feminine divine. So as women began to go through seminary and became scholars in religion, studying religion, and anthropologists, they began to see these different symbols, and they began to ask questions and dig into them. And they found this cup, and it was the cup of milk and honey. And they understood that this cup was lost to the tradition because it really symbolized this earthly presence of our bodies, of our beings. The cup of milk and honey recognized that we come into this world completely vulnerable, reliant on milk from another being, whether that's formula in a bottle or a mother's breast, that is literally part of what sustains us. And that within this lived experience, we go through hard times. We go through brokenness. We go through heartache. And yet, there is also the honey. The honey mixes with the milk, reminding us that although there is sometimes bitterness of the human heart and bitterness in the human experience, we have the sweetness of beauty. We have the sweetness of love. Some may call that God's love. Some may find it in other forms. But no matter what, they are always intertwined, this lived experience with something beautiful. So today, I wanted to talk a little bit about this, and I've actually prepared the ritual of milk and honey, and the kids are going to come down, and we'll invite all of us to have a little bit of it. But why I find this to be so important and why I wanted to remember this tradition today is because Reverend Otis Moss III, who's the minister at Trinity United Church of Christ in Chicago, descended from the other Reverend Otis Mosses that were part of the civil rights movement. He has this beautiful chapter called Consecrating Your Chaos, where he talks about an experience with gun violence in Chicago, where every inch of everybody just wanted to go out for revenge. And he said, no, we've got to consecrate our chaos. There are things that happen in this world, and we can just perpetuate the chaos, or we can say this is part of our lived experience, and this too can be holy. And the way that we embrace and react to it, if it's beauty and kindness and love, it will transform the whole experience. I've been thinking about this as I've been watching these different newspaper articles that are talking about how climate activists are throwing paint and tomato soup and red powder all over the Van Goghs and the US Constitution. And they're doing this out of this extinction rebellion, right? That if we can't have a future, if the future of climate change isn't hospitable to human life, we are going to take the things that we hold most sacred, the things of beauty, and we are going to destroy them so that you can feel what we are feeling, this destruction of the beauty of earth. And that's the opposite of consecrating your chaos. That's the opposite of what I understand the Navajo teaching of walking in beauty to be. And it doesn't lead us to more peace. So finding the sacred in our bodies, in our lived experiences, amidst the human condition of loneliness and pain, of bitterness and illness, of the violence in our world, we have that. Plus, we have the honey. What does it mean to live in a world with beauty? Desmond Tutu, amazing person who helped to create the peace and reconciliation process in South Africa, geez Louise, South Africa said this: we were made to enjoy music, to enjoy beautiful sunsets, to enjoy looking at the billows of the sea, and to be thrilled with a rose that is bedecked with dew. Human beings are actually created for the transcendent, for the sublime, for the beautiful, for the truthful, and all of us are given the task of trying to make this world a little more hospitable to these beautiful things. So, if you saw earlier, I spilled this all over myself, which is such a part of the human condition, right? So we take the milk and the honey, and we drink it together, reminding us of our lived experience and the sweetness of beauty and the sweetness of love. This liturgy comes from the reimagining movement, which was a Christian, feminine reimagining of Christian doctrine, and where they talked a lot about how Sophia, wisdom, spirit wisdom, was what Jesus Christ embodied. That's kind of a big stretch for some people. Some people know exactly what I'm talking about, but this idea of Sophia being present, and the liturgy goes like this. And Sophia invites us, all of you who are hungry, all of you who are hungry, come. All of you who are thirsty, all of you who are thirsty, come. All of you who are empty, come. Come to the table and be filled. You who desire abundant life, come drink milk and honey. Let the sweetness of this heal all that is bitter and broken within you. Come, all you who are hungry. Come, all you who are thirsty. Come, all you who are empty. Come. Now, in the Unitarian Universalist tradition, it's never a requirement and it's never an expectation. It's always an invitation. If you would like to partake in the cup of milk and honey, they are prepared here. While Sandra sings, and anyone's welcome to sing, Everything is Holy Now by Peter Mayer, I invite you to process forward. If you do not process forward, you will not be shamed. You will not be looked at in any weird way whatsoever. You will be welcome to choose how you interact with this holy sacrament. But please come, for all is ready. While Sandra sings Everything is Holy Now by Peter Mayer, take your cup of milk and honey, and as you sit and listen to the song, drink it as you feel moved to do so. Please, we'll wash the cups so that we aren't using more plastic in the world. And may you find a little bit of that sweetness